Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Loving obeisances unto the Supreme Being Vasudeva, who is everything there is. Janmadyasya yato anvayaditaratascha artheshu abhigyaswarat tene brahmahridaya adikavaye muhyanti yatsurayah tejo vari mridam yatha vinimayo yatra trisargo mrisha dhamna svena sada nirastakuhakam satyam param dhimahi. We meditate upon the transcendent absolute being from whom springs forth this universe. He is present in all that exists and yet distinct from everything. He is fully conscious and totally independent. He revealed to the first seer Brahma the import of Vedic wisdom. The material creation made of threefold gunas appears in him as though real, like water in a mirage. Being eternally self effulgent, he is ever free of the illusion maya of the material world. We meditate upon him, the Supreme Being. Nigama kalpataror galitam phalam shukamukad amrita drava sanyutam pibata bhagavatam rasamalayam muhuraho rasika bhui bhavukaha. O devotees who relish a taste for divine love, Bhagavatam is the fully ripened fruit of the wish-yielding tree of Vedas, flowing as immortal nectar from Shuka Brahmarshi. Go on drinking the sweet nectar day after day. So now we enter the sixth skandha of Srimad Bhagavatam, the first chapter of the sixth skandha. The sixth skandha is on the topic of grace, what's called Poshanam. So it has beautiful stories that bring out the grace of the Supreme Being. The first story itself is very famous, the story of Ajamila. So we enter the story of Ajamila in the first chapter, and it brings out the power of grace and the power of the holy names of the Lord. So the skandha begins, the first chapter begins with Parikshit now asking a question to Shuka Brahmarshi. He tells Shuka Brahmarshi, having listened to the entire previous skandha and before that as well, he says, O great sage, you have explained to me in great detail everything to do with various aspects of creation. You have first of all told me about the path of what is called as nivritti and pravritti. Nivritti is cessation from worldly activity, that is the one who takes retreat from the world, who leaves the engagement. So we saw this with many kings and so on, who left the world, retreated into the forest, and lived a life of solitude, quietude, and thereby realized the self. And then Parikshit says, you also talked about the way of pravritti, which is engaging in worldly activity, in which people are caught in the three gunas, and which are the modes of nature of Prakriti, and thereby the jivas are constantly being tossed and turned by Prakriti, by the three modes of nature. And then you've also described the various regions of this earth, the dvipas, the varshas, and then the 14 lokas, that is the 7 above and 7 below, and then the infernal regions of hell as well, where men go when they commit sinful activities. And then you also have described the whole lineage of the kings coming from Swayambhuva Manu through both Priyavrata and Uttanapada. So we saw all this in the fourth and fifth skandhas. We saw Uttanapada, the father of Dhruva, and then the lineage of Dhruva, in which came Prithu Maharaj and other great kings. We also saw Priyavrata, the other son of Swayambhuva Manu, and in his lineage comes great kings such as Lord Rishabha and Jadabharata and so on. So Parikshit says, you have described all the two lineages coming from Swayambhuva Manu, and you have described the earth in great detail, the mountains, the rivers, the trees, the gardens, everything. You have described the subterranean regions. You have described sun, moon, planets, stars, luminaries, everything. Now I have one question, which is, in this world which is so diverse and which is so variegated, with so many different aspects of the universe are all part of the Lord's creation, when one engages in worldly activity, what is the way to escape from hell? Because we saw that one who ceases from worldly activity, who takes up nivritti, he is able to be free of any entanglements and realize the self. But one who is engaged in worldly activity, he ends up committing sinful activities. And then we saw Shuka Brahmarshi describe the various types of hells one goes to by committing these sinful activities. So Parikshit asks out of great compassion for all those souls, how does one live in this world, engage in activity, and yet escape from these hells? So Shuka Brahmarshi replies by first saying, one has to atone for all the sins he committed and thereby he can escape. So, this is the general principle he gives. He says, if one has committed any sins with his mind itself, or his speech, or his body, then if one recognizes it and then he atones for it, then there are various sacrifices, what is called as prayashchitta, that are given by the scriptures. And by engaging in these prayashchittas or in these atonement procedures, one can avoid going to these infernal regions of hell, because the way to engage in life is similar to how he gives the example of, if let's say one has got a disease, one has to take the right remedy in order to be free of the disease. And similarly, the scriptures have given the right remedy in terms of various atonements or prayashchittas. So one has to, therefore, even while one is healthy, first of all, be aware of whatever sinful activities he has done and then engage in this atonement in order to be free. Now, Parikshit asks a very good question in reply. He says, this is all very good, but then we know that man engages in sinful activity out of lack of control. So even though he knows an activity to be sinful and he has heard about it, he has even seen others being punished for it, he loses control and then he does it. So how can there be atonement for him as long as the sinful propensity is there? So this is something we see practically in the world. No matter what punishments are given, no matter what instructions are given, there are many who engage repeatedly in sinful activities because the propensities are there. So what Parikshit says is, even if one engages in atonement, one goes to a temple or to a holy river or does a fire sacrifice or whatever it might be, the propensity is still there in him, so he's going to go back and do it. So he gives a nice example. He says, just as an elephant takes a bath and then it throws dust on its own body. So this is seen very commonly, how elephants go take a bath, clean themselves so nicely, come out to the banks, and immediately take dust and put it right on them. So the entire bath is being undone. Similarly, Parikshit says, people also, they do all these atonements and then they come back and immediately engage in sinful activities. He says, Prayashchittam atopartham manye kunjara shauchavat. Kunjara means elephant. Kunjara Shauchavat is a nice expression. It says, just as elephant does cleaning the body, similar is the act of atonement done by humans, because they always simply go repeated. That's why it's said that many who go to Ganga and take a bath, because it is said that taking a dip in Ganga washes off all the sins, but then they come back and then they right away go back to committing fresh set of sins. And so it's really of no use for them to take a dip in Ganga, because these propensities are still there. So Shuka Brahmarshi replies now. He's very happy with this question and he says, indeed, Parikshit, you are right. The counteraction of a sinful act through another act, which is an atonement, is very limited indeed. So now he first gave the general answer, but he was very happy that Parikshit draws out the essential way of atonement. So Shuka Brahmarshi says that the only true atonement is self-knowledge. He says it's only because of identification with the body as me, the ignorant ego pushes man to commit illegal, sinful activities of various kinds. So one goes about doing various sinful activities, and then various atonements are given, and the atonements are also done taking oneself to be the body. And then again the propensity for sin is there because the ego is still there, so it goes on endlessly. So Shuka Brahmarshi now says, yes, the true atonement is self knowledge and nothing else. And then therefore he gives the example of how if one gets disease and takes medicines, and then he will get the same disease again if he is not fixing the way he lives. So similarly, which is to say, if one doesn't eat wholesome food, one doesn't take care of his living lifestyle and simply relies on medicines, then the medicine will have only temporary effect. After the medicine wears off, again a new disease will come, again another medicine. It's endless, and this is what people go through even physically. But if one instead lives a disciplined life, having the right diet, right exercise, and right lifestyle, then that cuts the root of the disease. So similarly, Parikshit is told by Shuka Brahmarshi that one, instead of doing atonement for specific sinful acts, is like taking medicine, as he already saw. But if one is able to live a disciplined life, that's like living a healthy lifestyle, keeping, just as keeping the body healthy, one can keep the mind pure. So he says one can thereby, if he lives a life of self discipline and keeps the mind pure, then through the various practices that are given, which have been talked about in detail in many chapters before, by living in austerity, which, because all these are necessary to be free of the identification with ego, the pure mind alone is able to be free of this identification. So the ground being pure through austerity, through continence, through control of the senses, through renouncing unnecessary property or unnecessary things in life, through speaking the truth, through living purely, through being peaceful inwardly and outwardly, through all the sacred observances, one can retain the spirit of dharma. And if one retains the spirit of dharma, then one is not engaged in sinful activities. And even if any sinful activities were committed before, when one fundamentally changes the way of living, then all of those burn away. But then Shuka Brahmarishi adds a direct way. So this involves all these various things we saw: austerities and control of the senses and purity and all the rest, which are all great practices. Yoga talks about it and various disciplines talk about it, and which are a very healthy way to live life and keep mind pure and thereby remove the seed for sinful propensities. But Shuka Brahmarishi says, on the other hand, if one is completely surrendered unto the Supreme Being Vasudeva, then all of this come instantly. So instead of the gradual process of purifying the mind through all these various practices and so on, if one completely surrenders to Vasudeva, the Supreme Being, then such a person, just as the sun clears the mist in an instant, similarly, the surrender removes the very root of ignorance. He says, Kechit Kevalaya Bhaktya Vasudeva Parayanaha Aghamdunvanti Kartsniyena Niharamiva Bhaskaraha. So he says, just as Bhaskara means sun, just as the sun completely removes the mist in one instant as soon as it shines brightly, similarly, devotion to Vasudeva can in one instant remove all the sinful propensities. Therefore, he says, all other processes, including asceticism, control of the senses, yoga, and all the rest, are not as efficacious as complete surrender unto Krishna. He says, Krishnarpita pranaha. When one's energy, life is devoted to Krishna, then that surrender, that dedication of giving one's entire being to Krishna is more effective, instantaneously effective than the gradual process of yoga and so on. Therefore, he says, in this world, this way of devotion is the best of all. He says, Sadri chino hayam loke panta kshemo kuto bhayah. He says this way of devotion, this way of surrender is completely free of fear. It is the direct way. It bestows auspiciousness instantly. So he says, being devoted to the Supreme Being Narayana, Sushilaha sadhavo yatra Narayana parayanaha. So he says, those who tread this way of complete surrender unto Narayana and who are desireless naturally because of such surrender, they live free of any sinful propensities. Otherwise, all the atonements cannot purify one because, as we saw, the seed for sinful propensities is the ego, and that is not removed by any other activities of atonement. But if one surrenders the ego entirely and thereby free of I and mine, then the very root is taken away. Therefore, he concludes by saying that even once, if one is able to dedicate one's entire being to Lord Krishna, then such surrender ensures that one doesn't even see the messengers of death. So Yama is known as the deity of death, and Yama's messengers are known to come with a noose in their hand at the time of death for all beings in order to take them to the next state. It may be the infernal region of hell that was described before, or it may be another life in a different form. But it is said that the one who is fully surrendered, he is completely outside the jurisdiction of Yama, and he is directly given abode in the Supreme Being's abode of Vaikuntha. So it is said, even once, if one surrenders unto Krishna with all his heart, then he is outside the purview of Yama. He says, Sakran Manaha Krishna Padara Vindayor Nirveshitam Tad Gunaragi Yairiha. So if one once surrenders unto the lotus feet of Krishna completely, then he says, Swapnepi Pashyantihi Chirni Nishkrita Nate Yamam Pasha Bhritascha Tadbhatan Swapneti Pashyantihi Chirni Nishkrita. Not even in dream does he see the noose of the messengers of death. So now, in order to illustrate this whole point that Shuka Brahmarshi has made, he narrates a beautiful story. Shuka Brahmarshi says, listen to this story. This story will bring about this truth of the greatness of surrender unto the Supreme Being, and even not even surrender, but just taking his holy name. So he says, there was once a Brahmana called Ajamila who lived in the place called Kanauj. Kanauj is somewhere near Kanpur today, in today's Bharat. And in this place, Kanauj, lived one Brahmana called Ajamila. And Shuka Brahmarshi says, his story will come in a little more detail later. But right now he says this Ajamila was somehow in the trap of a Dasi woman. Dasi woman is a prostitute. And so he fell for this Dasi woman, and he was in her trap, so to speak, and with her he lived, abandoning his family. He lived with this prostitute woman, with this Dasi, and he engaged in many illegal activities such as robbery, gambling, cheating, etc., in order to provide for this Dasi woman and her needs. And with this woman, he had, it is said, 10 children, and he grew old, and he was completely living under her control, and he was completely addicted to her and to this family that he now brought forth with this woman of 10 kids. And he became an old man. He became 88 years old by and by, with 10 sons with this woman. But the only thing he does, which is very interesting and which saves him, is the last son, he names him Narayana. So he is, we will see later that he was a very pious Brahman who was very devoted, and he fell, and how he fell, all this will come soon. But because of his past memory, he somehow kept the name Narayana, which is the name of the Supreme Being, to his last son. And he was especially fond of this last son, Narayana, who was a young boy, and he was always feeding him, taking care of him, giving him water, putting him in his lap, and so on. without recognizing that his death is coming soon. And one day, sure enough, as he is now 88, this this Ajamila's hour of death came, but he was thinking only of his son Narayana because he was so attached to him. And it is said that three terrible figures came who are the messengers of death, and it is said only the one who is dying can see them, others cannot see them, but the one who is about to die sees these messengers and knows that his time has come. And so it is said that this Ajamila saw these three terrible looking messengers of death come, but he was only able to think of his son Narayana. So he called out his son Narayana. And Narayana didn't hear him, so he called out loud the name Narayana. But as soon as he called out the name Narayana loudly, it is said that the messengers of the Supreme Being came right there. So, normally, as we saw, Shuka Brahmarshi said that one who is even surrendered once to the Supreme Being, the messengers of death have no control over him. He is outside their jurisdiction, and the messengers of the Supreme Being come and take him directly to the abode of the Supreme. So, this is all symbolized by this incident. It is said that Ajamila was then visited instantly because he called out the name Narayana from his heart, even though it was only with attachment to his son, but just the power of the name is brought out here. Just because he kept the name of the Supreme Lord to his son and he called that name from his heart, instantly there came the messengers of the Supreme Being, and Yama's messengers, the messengers of death, were shaken by seeing them because they never confront them, because as we saw, their jurisdiction is completely different. Messengers of death take away all the people who are caught in the web of Maya, and the one who is free of Maya is what is visited by the messengers of the Supreme Lord. But here they came face to face. So the messengers of death were very perturbed. They said, "Who are you here? You look like wonderful divine beings," because they have never seen them before. The messengers of death, they don't even know how the messengers of the Supreme Being look like, or even how the Supreme Being looks like. So they describe their features, which are exactly like the Supreme Being. They say that you are looking very beautiful, you all are looking very youthful, you have four arms, you have a mace, you have a conch, you have a lotus flower, and you have a wheel, that is Shanka, Chakra, Gada, Padma, which are the exact four weapons with the four arms of the Supreme Being. You're wearing yellow silk and you're having lotus petals, your eyes are like lotus. So the entire description is the exact same as the description of the Supreme Lord Narayana. So it is said that all the attendants of the Supreme Lord look exactly like him. So these attendants who are exactly looking and shining radiant like the Lord are there, and these messengers of death are disturbed. So they ask him, "Who are you? You are looking so divine, and yet we are here to take this fellow away according to the orders of our master Yama. And what are you doing here? Because you seem to be hindering our work here." And so they look at this messengers of death and they laugh and they speak in a very deep voice, the rumbling of the clouds. This is always described as the voice of the Supreme Being also. And these messengers also have this voice. And so they first ask these messengers of death, if you are truly servants of Yama, the deity of Dharma, because Yama, the deity of death, is also the deity of Dharma, because he maintains dharma in the universe, and according to laws of dharma, upon death, he takes people, it is said, to the next life, and whether it is a heavenly life or a hellish life or the in between life of a human life on earth, which is mixed, all of this is determined according to principles of dharma. So they are asking the messengers of death, tell us what is the essence of dharma. You have to know this in order to give the punishment correctly to the right person. So the messengers of death now reply, they say, Dharma is that which is encoded in the Vedas, and it is the Supreme Being Narayana who brings out dharma through the Vedas, and anything that is contrary to that is adharma or not dharma, not dharmic. So then they describe what they understand, which is all correct at a very fundamental level. They explain beautifully. In fact, they say that the Supreme Lord Narayana, so they don't even realize that they are talking to the messengers of the Supreme Being Narayana, because they've never come face to face with them. So they just know what they have learned from their master, which is Yama, who is a self realized being and who is just engaging in these activities because that's his duty. So, whatever they have learned from their master, they are telling here, they are saying that the Supreme Lord Narayana has made this universe with three gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas, and all the people, all the jivas are caught in these three gunas, and all their activities are witnessed by many. So, they say the sun, the fire, sky, air, the moon, the twilights, day and night, water, earth, time, and dharma itself, these are all the witnesses of a jiva. So, this is why it is said that we always are being witnessed by all these various aspects of nature. So, to these days, there is CCTV cameras, and people are always worried about being watched, and they function differently depending on whether they are watched or not being watched. But the truth is, we are always being watched inwardly. And if we are aware of that, then we will not be worried about who's watching outwardly. So that's what Yama's messengers are saying. The time is always watching us. The principle of dharma is always watching us. The elements such as the sun, the moon, the stars, they are all watching us. And most importantly, our own conscience is watching us. And therefore, they say that whatever is unrighteous is fit for punishment, and all those who do anything that is unrighteous are deserving such punishment, because good and evil deeds are always the result of people engaging in actions, and they have their own results. So they say that anyone who has got a body, he engages in action, and the actions are either virtuous or sinful or a mixture of both, and depending on that they receive the fruit. Then they say, as we can see in this world, we see people who are entirely pious, people who are entirely vile or vicious, and then people who are in between. And similarly, same with activities, we see that people who are very tranquil and calm in their activities, people who are very agitated and disturbed, and then people who are in between. From these three types of various activities, meritorious, sinful, and mixed, we can deduce that there are past actions that are pushing them. It is only the past seeds of actions, which are either good or evil or a mixture of two, that makes people engage in virtuous activities, sinful activities, or a mixture of both. And similarly, these activities will in turn take them to their next destination, which will also be determined by these. So, in other words, this is a cycle of time which is unending, as long as one is caught in the web of Maya, which is the sense of doership or the ego. So, there is no escape through activities, is the essence of all this, which the messengers of death are also describing correctly. They are saying that no matter what one does, if one does good actions, he gets the reward for it. If one does evil actions, he gets the punishment for it. And if one does mixed actions, he gets mixed results for it. And then he does actions based on that situation, the new situation, and then that in turn leads to the next, and on and on. So we see that this is going on, and everything that is happening in the past is what is making the present manifest, and whatever is happening in the present will make the future manifest. And our master Yama, who is expert in all this, he looks at the former state of existence of these jivas. He also knows what they are doing now, and therefore he determines what is their future destiny, where should they go. The jivas are not aware, they only take the current body mind instrument to be their reality, but our master knows exactly what their past was and what their future will be. They don't have the memory of it, and therefore they are lost in this identification, and thereby they are engaging in actions whereas our job is to execute what our master tells us to take them to their future destination, which is the right body they need to take depending on their actions. Because they say that the jiva is always under the hold of the senses, that is the senses of both perception and action, and also the mind and the various elements. And with this, he is always engaging in action of some kind or the other. And as long as he is not able to subdue the senses of perception and the mind, that is, if one's senses of perception, which are seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching, and the sixth being the mind, which is thinking, if these are not subdued, if these are not regulated, then the jiva, the subtle I, the individual being that seems to exist, he is drawn by these senses to engage in actions and thereby get himself caught in the network of karma. And therefore, because one cannot remain actionless even for a moment, their past impressions make them act now, and their current activities create impressions for their future. And thereby, they are entering womb after womb, and they are constantly going through this degeneration, and they are always identified with one body or another due to the maya of prakriti. So this is the essence of the nature of the jiva. So the messengers of death have accurately described what happens to one who is caught in the web of karma, which is the web of doership. So the whole aspect of karma, which is cause and effect, which is due to doership, is described very accurately by the messengers of death. And so, according to them, that is the main thing, that is the only thing. And therefore, they say that according to this, we have to give the right punishment or reward, and that's why we are here. Then they now tell the story of Ajamila again to fill the details to these messengers of Bhagavan as if they don't know, but they are just narrating this. They say, you have to know that this Ajamila was indeed a man of great learning. He knew the Vedas, he was having good conduct, he was very virtuous, he was engaging in worship, he had his senses regulated, he was very pure, he knew mantras, he was worshipping the sacred fire, he was free of various negative activities of any kind. He was very pious, he was without any envy. So in other words, he was a very good being in many ways. It says very nicely here all these qualities, how he was offering homage to his guru, to the elders. Guru Agnir Atiti Vriddhanam Sushrushuhu means one who served his guru, one who served the fire, one who served guests, one who served elders, one who was living in a very good way. And yet, all it took was one fall. So, this is again a story which brings out many aspects. First is how someone who is living in a very regulated way can still fall because of one moment, and that's how powerful Maya is. So, this man is not some ordinary man, Ajamila. He's a well read Brahmana who's got all these great qualities. It's also said he's Dhrita Vrataha. He's got a very firm vow normally. He is Satyavan. He speaks the truth. He's Mantravit. He knows mantras. Shuchihi. He's pure. And he's Shilaha. He's got good character, good conduct. So, all of this, he's got everything in him, and yet, what happens is one day he goes to the woods in obedience to his father's command in order to get some fruits and flowers from the woods and so on for fire, sacrificial fire. And there, what he happens to see is he sees this woman, this Dasi woman, in a very immodest way with another man. And this somehow completely captivates him. The sight of her not dressed properly, almost naked, and she is there in the woods with this other man. He sees her, and this man is somehow, this was the one spot which he was not clear about, or somehow he was not ready to handle that temptation, so he fell for it. And therefore, when he saw this woman, this Dasi woman, being dressed so immodestly, and also she saw him, and she looked at him in a very tempting way, very inviting way, and so on. So this disturbed this man completely, and so he went back. He tried to control his mind with reason and with his learning and whatever he knew, but he couldn't do any of that. He was completely agitated by this lust for her, and so he was completely excited by it, and he was deprived of his reason, and so he neglected all his duty, it is said. So this man, who was very devout otherwise, who was pious, who was devoted to his guru, to his elders, to his father, and he was married to a very good pious woman, and he had a family, and he was, as we said, of good conduct otherwise. So he had everything correct in him, but because of this one, and this again is another lesson of this story, is the power of one moment of what is called as momentary lapse of reason can result in great calamity. So this momentary lapse of reason is what happens to Ajamila because of this lewd woman, and he is unable to control his passion. So he goes back to her, he finds her, and he has got more money, and she is, of course, very happy to go with him. So she comes with him, and he leaves everything. He leaves his family, he leaves his wife, and he just completely falls for her. As it is said, hook, line, and sinker, he falls for her, and he takes the entire fortune. His father had all the fortune. Now he is become so fallen that he engages all that money for carnal pleasure to please this woman, and his judgment is completely crippled, and he has abandoned his wedded wife, who is very good family and good person, who was serving him nicely, and yet he abandoned her completely, and he is only interested in pleasing this Dasi woman. And after spending all the fortune of his father, he runs out of money, and then he now starts engaging in foul means to support this woman. So that's why it was said already, he engaged in robbery, cheating, and all kinds of gambling and other activities, and violated all kinds of scriptural injunctions, and started living more and more a sinful life. And he was eating the food of this woman, which was simply eating poison, because she was only interested in getting more and more from him, and he fell for her. And then, as we saw, he also had sons with her. Instead of living the way he was living before, now he was engaged in a family life with this Dasi woman, and this is how he lived his life. So the merchants of death describe all this, and then they say that the messengers of death say, so since this is the way he has lived, he deserves the rod of punishment from the deity of death, who is our master Yama, because he now needs to be purified through punishment. So this is what they conclude. So according to them, their case is pretty solid, because they found this man who fell from grace very badly and did all kinds of sinful activities, and therefore he needs to be punished very badly. Now, with this chapter ends, and we will now see in the next chapter what the messengers of the Supreme Being say, and how the power of the holy name, which he invoked upon the moment of his death by calling his son Narayana, how that had such an effect on his journey, is what we will see in the next chapter. So, as we saw, this Skandha is about grace, and grace is so costless and comes undeservingly, and therefore this Ajamila was also visited with grace by simply getting the instinct to call the name of the Lord at the moment of death, and thereby bringing forth the messengers of the Supreme Being, who are now countering the messengers of death. And through this, we will know more about the grace of the holy name in the next chapter. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.